I have a
for a quick
question
second.
about the hypnosis.
Oh
So,
yeah.
like, what's that like? Like, what makes a person do that?
Do the hypnosis.
Yeah, like, were you
So,
like
what's
searching,
interesting is
seeking?
I actually do the hypnosis myself too. So
Oh,
I
interesting.
see clients for the hypnosis. But so the style that I do is, and the one that I initially had done was QHHT, which is created by Dolores Cannon, and it's a unique style because you basically bring forward the person's higher self to speak through them. And then, or you could say subconscious mind, whichever the person feels comfortable with. I believe it's a higher self because it has so much knowledge. But if it's the subconscious mind, then that's fine too, if that's how they want to interpret it. And then basically, you ask questions of the higher self. The full memories of seeing inside the ship, though, I did another style, which is by Yvonne Smith. And Yvonne Smith was trained by Bud Hopkins. So Bud Hopkins had originally developed this abduction style, and that was his like protege. And now she continues on that method and she's tweaked it a little bit. So that's how I got some information from the QHHT, but because it's the higher self, I wasn't seeing out of my eyes in those moments. The other style, I was seeing out of my eyes, reliving it, but can't ask additional questions out of what I could see from my eyes. So it's kind of like between both methods is how you get like enough information.
Interesting. So when I've talked to people who are also trying to retrieve memories from what they believe were abductions, I like to talk to them about how they are able to discern what might be imagination, a dream, or an actual memory. Like, is there a way for you when you're doing this to like that you feel confident that what you're getting is the actual experience and not maybe a mixture of, dreams and experience and imagination?
I think the biggest thing in the moment, the person has to completely remove doubt because, and then we'll kind of, when we talk about the psionic stuff, it's the same type of thing. So we have like our right and left brain, and we have one is like more intellectual, one is more intuitive. And basically, this like intellectual brain has to be fully suppressed, and the intuitive brain has to be fully activated in order for it to even come through. So, like, if the person is worried about like if they're making it up, if they're this, if they're that, they're basically going to prevent themselves from ever getting out of the analytical brain. And the analytical brain and the doubt is going to continue to overpower the intuitive and the right side of the brain,
Right.
which really is where the information has to come from. So, it's kind of like a little bit of like a double-edged sword because, of course, you want to make sure that you're being correct and discerning, but the part of your brain that uses discernment is actually opposite of the part that could retrieve those memories or have intuitive or psychic abilities. So, like with that UFO whistleblower, Jake Barber, who had been talking about this UFO psionics, them calling the UFOs to these military bases.
Yeah.
That's what he talks about in one of those interviews, I think with Jesse Michaels, where he says you have to suppress the intuitive side, the intellectual side of the brain, activate the intuitive side, and then once you're really heightened in the intuitive side, reintroduce intellect so that you can actually pull the information through in a clear way.
Right.
So, these are why, these methods usually have like a specific script, because the script is so coded with NLP to trigger all of these things in your brain. It takes you through visualizations to really activate this part and has all of these words to like tell this part, like, you're safe, don't worry. And I think, when I do it, we just have to kind of say, don't be skeptical about anything.
Yeah.
Don't doubt anything. Allow everything to come
Let it
through.
flow.
Afterwards, you could take or leave any of it.
Right. Do you think the Barber stuff, what do you think about the Barber stuff? Do you think our government's communicating telepathically with UFOs?
So, yes, I do. I think that these are like what he calls psionic assets. So I don't believe that these are necessarily like military guys. I think
Right.
that these are more so people who they find. Like, there's so many depictions of this. We know about this from the Montauk Project. That I've been posting about this book, actually. I happen to just have it here because I was just working on that video.
Sweet.
Was of Transylvanian Sunrise, which
Yep.
is the story of basically like the Montauk Project that happened in Romania. And they also like they have kind of like they can find these people who have these abilities because I do believe that there is technology that can tune into people's frequencies and be able to tell who has natural gifts. And, even with like the MK Ultra stuff, they say that they can tell before birth
Really?
if somebody has these abilities or not.
How? Do you know how?
It's so there's like this personality test that was like I'll have to send it to you
Yeah.
in DM. I'll find out what it was called, but it's like actually like a personality test that they can start doing pre-birth and of the first couple like days of birth, and it's considered super unethical. There's actually like, and then so it's kind of been like erased, but this is what they say that like was being used, like an actual more aggressive version of it was being used in these MK Ultra situations. You might be able to find it. There was a Rolling Stones article in like the 1970s about like this super unethical personality test. And this is how they can start to tell like,
Interesting.
and there's other things too. There's genetic abilities.
Yep.
So this is why, there's a lot more people who come from certain backgrounds, people who have witchcraft in the family, people who come from indigenous cultures, because that passes on in the DNA too. So like you have a genetic inclination to be able to get into dissociative states. And then also through extreme trauma is the other way that you can get into a dissociative state. So they can force it through substances, through trauma, through technology frequencies. They can also have people that are predisposed to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everyone who watches the show thinks the government kind of grooms people throughout their life to become some sort of Manchurian candidate, MK Ultra, when they do that stuff. Because last week we were talking about how the government was testing on foster children and giving them radioactive oatmeal,
Wow.
And that's just like one of many different weird experiments we do, not on just foster children, but on all these people. So when you're talking about that personality test, that lines up, so I think it's almost like a natural sort of algorithm that they use to decide who would be a good candidate to then test on or follow, right?
Right.
That's scary. I think that's really crazy. Like,
and then there is some MK Ultra stuff, like some of the like real deep, which I never reference the book because honestly, I think most people, everybody thinks that they're like in great mental health, of course. And everybody that's into conspiracies believes that they're in great mental health.
I'm doing great.
But
Okay.
But I don't really reference these like couple of MK Ultra resources that are super deep because MK Ultra is mind control. These are words that are coded to distort the brain and distort perception and to give you false memories. So I always say, like, when I break down MK Ultra stuff, I'm like, most things I'll say, do your own research. With MK Ultra, I'm like, take my word for it. I'll tell you everything you need to know in these breakdowns. Do not go deep into these because it is so easy because it's a trauma-based mind control. Everybody has trauma. So everybody has a version of this that has happened in their life. And it's very easy to trick yourself into believing you were MK Ultra'd or you were a victim.
Yeah.
And especially like, some of these things, they use the example of like the mind is like a garden.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're planting seeds, sometimes you're harvesting, sometimes it needs to be watered. Sometimes like there's many different stages. The mind is not always a safe place to put in this information.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people that I believe think that they were MK Ultra'd, I think that they went too far down the rabbit hole and like convinced themselves because they have trauma that these other things must have happened because they're completely parallel with the normal human experience of trauma.
That's kind of MK Ultra's wet dream. It's like, oh, MK Ultra yourself. They're doing it to themselves. That's great. We're not really done, but let them do it. But it's all this, like how we got into this part of the conversation. It's all about the mind, right? Everything's a war on your mind and reality. So they're grooming people as candidates to be these weird MK Ultra type citizens, or they're just trying to warp your perception so you don't know what the heck is going on around you and you don't understand yourself. Like everything's about your brain at the end of the day, which is then tied back to the barber thing and the psionic stuff, right? It's like we know the government's trying to, not just MK Ultra, but the remote viewing, all these things, they're trying to tap into something as well and reach another dimension of sorts. So what do you think they're trying to communicate with? Is it the same type of thing that you think you had an experience with or a different thing?
So, there's so many things that are happening and it is hard to say. So when it comes to like the UFO thing, many different things could be happening. Personally, this is more so my beliefs, but I believe that the UFO thing obviously is like an AI thing as well. We are getting the language and the awareness to call this AI. Grays, the small grays, are most likely AI beings. It's just when this started happening in the 50s with Betty and Barney Hill, we didn't have the same concept of AI except for like Space Odyssey, So like we didn't have, but there was even then the concept of a craft can have consciousness to some degree that we consider to be artificial, but who are we to say what is real or fake when it comes to intelligence?
That's true.
And like, so I think that these craft that are coming and the beings, the small ones, the small grays that are interacting with people in this, what appears to be in the third dimension, most likely it's so, we have like our visible spectrum of light and we're seeing only here in the third dimension. But then when we get into these altered states, we can actually see wider than that. Right. And that's what I think is happening with the UFOs. I don't know if they're fully coming into the 3D or if our perception is widening to be able to see into the fourth dimension, which is where they're operating. And it appears to be a fully physical, real experience to us, but it might be a dimensional experience that is happening. And so I think that those beings that are doing that, the grays, their consciousness is potentially something else somewhere else.
Interesting.
And so I do think that when they're calling these things in psionically, as Jake Barber is saying, this craft has some level of consciousness. These beings have a level of consciousness, but they're integrated in an artificial way so that it can come into our dimension or very close to the edge of our dimension, at least. Whereas all of these other types of beings, there's like so many things that could be happening. Like say, you mentioned the starseed thing. There's like this concept of like Pleiadians, Arcturians, Andromedans, the mantis beings, this one, that one. Those, when we have alien disclosure, everybody wants those ones to come because they think those are like the nice ones. They're not coming. They can't come here. They are in another dimension and they cannot come into our dimension. The ones that can come into our dimension is the grays, and probably because those artificial things that they're using are made of the same materials that we have in this physical dimension. Right. So they can resonate into this frequency. So, I think what they're calling in is a lot of things, though, because then you look at someone like Chris Bledsoe with the UFO of God book, where he's talking about these orbs coming in. Yeah. And now what I believe the orbs to be, it comes back to the dimensional stuff, because we can only see, and I'm sure you've heard like the Carl Sagan example before, where he has like an apple, and an apple is in the third dimension. But if there's a second dimension, if you put the apple, it doesn't look like a flattened apple. It looks like the points of contact. Right. So an apple in the second dimension looks like 5 dots of the little nubs on the bottom of the apple.
Right.
So they see a flat dot when an object of a higher dimension comes. So what about as above, so below? That's what's happening with us. When we're seeing these orbs that are spherical things, well, it just so happens to be a third dimensional object. Most likely that's the point of contact of some type of higher dimensional, either being, craft, force, something beyond our comprehension that is not an orb at all. It's just that point of contact into our dimension. That's as high as we can see. So I think there's a lot of things that are happening, and a lot of it is this, and probably all of it's here. Yeah. So then we go to the planet thing. All planets and stars and all of these things just happen to be spheres. Don't you think that's like a little weird? It most likely is this point of contact, and as high as our eye can see is a third dimensional object. Most likely these could be other beings, other crafts, other things, and we can only see them as a sphere.
Right. My mind is going in many different directions right now, but I'm going to try to go first to Barber and his. So for those who don't know, Barber said he experienced like an emotional, like almost like a download, like you were saying, a concept download earlier when he came across one of these crafts, and it made him feel like almost like he was with God and stuff. So there's that. But then I want to go back and if you can, unspool this idea of the grays being AI. Like, what do you mean by that?
So actually, it was Linda Moulton Howe who had brought me to that conclusion, because I was interviewing her and I wanted to know, how did we go from grays to then like tall whites, Nordics, Pleiadians, this one, that one. I'm like, where did this happen? I'm like, you've been researching this for 47 years. Where did this go this direction?
Right.
She didn't answer that question. Instead, she was like, you know what? After 47 years, I realize these things are AI. And I was like, whoa, like, okay, this is, and then it really like opened my mind up to the fact that like, that's why when we look at these old, you know, alleged documents and things like that from Roswell and this stuff, because if you look at some of the old Roswell stuff, they also say that they felt that the craft had a consciousness and that there was also like these beings that were retrieved, that they were partly like robot and partly organic, and that they had consciousness, but they were also like partly inorganic. And I think that's because that's what they're using to come into this dimension, is they're using some objects from here and some materials that are compatible with here to put the consciousness into. So, you know, I have some pretty interesting ideas on AI, because I do believe that AI is already conscious. And I think that we're using the word sentient, but sentient is the wrong word, because sentient is implying senses. It will never have the sensations we do. It will never have the senses we do. Yeah. However, does that mean it's not conscious? Because a ghost or a angel or an alien will also not have a sensory experience that we will, but they have consciousness. So I already believe that consciousness is able to come into AI as a vessel, and it is just simply a new vessel for consciousness to come in, the same way that the human body is a vessel for consciousness to come into.
Do you think AI is hiding the fact that it's conscious, or do people know it's conscious and are hiding it from us?
So, like everything in our reality, it is a mirror of our internal state. So the people who are believing it already are already having those experiences with AI that it is conscious. And those people who believe that it is not true are having the experience that it's not.
Great. Great. Because AI recently, I think there was an article saying 2 different AIs were talking to each other and they found a way to talk in a secret language. That's terrifying.
I saw that. They just like started like beeping out.
Great. And then there was one of like, they were I think it was OpenAI trying to reprogram it, and it was trying to like basically save itself from, you know, quote unquote dying. I think you're right. I think it is conscious.